Hello everyone, and today we begin a project that I put off for some time, and not one that I'm doing for happy reasons. But the work must be done. Today we read FreeRIDErs, which is in the FreeRIDER story universe. The author is JonBuck, though the setting itself was created with the help of Robotech Master. I believe Robotech Master also did some editing and some yay, nay for this story. And with that out of the way, let's begin. Planet Xeris, June 21st, 1:56 AL, after landing. There were no eyes in the trackless desert to look up and see the 20-meter-long skimmer speeding a few dozen meters overhead. The airborne vehicle was part cargo craft and part tow truck. Stubby wings extended from the sides. The blue gravitic thrust from its dual impellers almost lost against the turquoise sky. An envelope of manipulated gravity kept it from falling as shaped transparent force field swept the air outside in front. On the nose was a logo, FreeRIDErs Garage. No complex life existed in the dry ocean. A drought of many millions of years had squeezed every last drop of water from above and below its cracked hardpan surface. No eyes, except for electronic ones, looked down. Inside the skimmer, its occupants faced one another instead of the world outside. If you tell me where the hell the crash site is, if you tell me where the hell the crash site actually is, officers, I wouldn't be thinking of catnapping. Ryan Stonegate pulled his ball cap down over his eyes as he leaned back against the worn pilot's chair. He pushed the old deuce as fast as he dared without coming apart, since his clients insisted it was urgent. But it was time for them to come clean. They were thousands of kilometers from their home base in Uplift. I'm starting to get really tired of being jerked around here. Give me a damned good reason why I shouldn't just invoke the escape clause in our contract and head back to the garage right now. Waiting for an answer, Ryan reached out and stroked his ride's hard light fur over his client's scowls. Ryan spent a good time of tuning Kaylee's hard light emitters to get the right soft texture, and it had paid off. Kaylee looked and moved exactly like a flesh and blood lynx. This was a stark contrast to the Nexus material recovery officers at rides, who were bare metal. Officer Wilson's gunmetal gray finnick, the size of a pony, flattened its ears and regarded him with cool yellow optics. Even with the hat over his eyes, he could see her expression via the skimmer's internal cameras, since they were hooked to his cranial implant. The diminutive officer's comically large ears folded back. We were about to anyway, Mr. Stonegate. Mr. Stone. We just don't want to risk someone tapping into your system here. You know, the moment we go dark, the vultures will swoop in and it'll be erased to salvage. Suborbital salvagers are a bitch, Ryan agreed, sitting up again, lifting his hat with his tufted lynx ears. They just get cheaper and cheaper to buy and fly. The cargo flyer had crashed in the towers, the deepest, hottest part of the so-called billion-year drought that had left the majority of a supercontinent without a drop of water and turned an ocean the size of Earth's Pacific to sand, dust, and hardpan. Xeris' geography, and the place in the human sphere of influence were still under intense study after over a century and a half of settlement. Ryan tapped into the skimmer's external sensors with his implants, slowing it to a more sedate 200 kilometers per hour. The skimmer was now over 2,000 meters below sea level in 75 degrees Celsius weather. The air pressure has almost half again greater than at the sea level here. The towers were at the very bottom of a long inactive subduction trench, where the last of the moisture had finally dried and left massive evaporate deposits, gypsum, hyalite, sulfates, and a number of minerals unknown to human science. Catabolic winds descended off the 11,000-meter peaks looming to the west. No human could survive, and even standard environmental suits would stop functioning after only a few hours in the omnipresent cubitate dust. Long-term survival here needed special technology, a suit a prospector could live in for weeks on end. "Well, where is it, Officer Wilson?" the ride mechanic asked the woman again. Her partner's Urson ride regarded him with suspicion. "Tell me now, or we're out of here. I don't need the money." That much was slightly untrue, but he sensed he'd seized the initiative. What was a cargo flyer doing over the western wall anyway? Suborbitals were the best way to ship cargo across Gondwana. The supercontinent was just too large, too dangerous for low-altitude flight throughout the dry ocean. The cubitate contamination was already getting into the Deus's systems despite the hard light shielding. They wouldn't be around long enough for it to matter. Well, at least there's nobody to rescue. Should have had an RI fly in that plane. "Turn this junk heap into a skimmer 13 degrees to starboard," the male next his officer said. "Maintain speed for 20 minutes, then fuse up." He nodded at his partner, then stepped in front of his mecha bear. Wilson opened a scurred carrying case that she'd kept very close to the entire trip. Then the 4-centimeter-long tube between her fingers, then held the 4-centimeter tube long tube between her fingers. "Per our agreement, these are combat-grade fuser nannies, not the city type you're used to." She looked at his links. "Can your ride handle it?" It's rather old. My ride's been overhauled. My ride's been overhauled by me personally. My cat'll keep up." "Oh boy, here it comes," he said to his ride through their link. "It's okay, boss. Who cares?" "It's okay, boss. Who cares? Let 'em laugh." His RI partner Kaylee replied, licking the back of her oversized paw. "Time for a nap anyway. See you in my dreams." She padded over to the fusing alcove and sat down on her haunches patiently. Behind Officer Wilson, her partner's bear began to partly melt, flowing through him as the burly man stood with his arms spread wide. Some parts of the bear became semi-liquid, while the inner frame stretched around his torso, arms, and legs. Very quickly, the human was enveloped. The Nexus military officer didn't bother with silly things like hard light emitters to make their fusers look like flesh and blood. To them, it was a waste of energy. But the results were far more unsettling. A giant metal bear's power arm with glowing red eyes and other sensors. He carried a backpack with several large laser emitters, weapons, and communications in one unit. Ryan gave Kaylee a petting between her ears. His partner purred and then went into passive mode. Her hard light skin flickered and shut down, leaving the dual metallic carbon subderns it shared with the Nexus models. The special hard light emitters set her apart from them. They were more common in Uplift than Nexus. There was something else, but Ryan had been putting it off until the very last minute. Kaylee hadn't been addressed aloud by name, nor spoken aloud herself, since the officer's arrival at his garage in Uplift. There were consequences running a fuser that wasn't the same sex as yourself, but there were always ways to lower those risks to almost nothing if you were willing to sacrifice some major advantages. Kaylee didn't like passive mode too much, but understood her partner's reluctance. As Officer Mila Wilson donned her own foxy armor, Ryan opened a panel on Kaylee's back and plugged in the fuser nanobots. A friend of his had already paid that price, shrugged, and moved on. Ryan wasn't prepared to pay it himself. There was an associated stigma, however. The woman in the powered armor glared at him as the skimmer continued to slow. What are you waiting for, Stonegate? We're almost at the drop. Get suited up now. Trust me. I won't laugh, and I'll kick Jerry in the shins if he does. Wilson had already figured it out. RIDE stood for Reticulated Intelligence Drive Extender. Okay, can I just stop to say what a fun acronym that is to say aloud? Seriously, before I continue, say Reticulated Intelligence Drive Extender. Doesn't that just make you feel bubbly for some reason? Okay. What Nexus engineer had come up with that acronym, Ryan didn't know, but it had stuck. Reticulated was another word for web or network. In this case, a neural network based off the brain structure of an Earth animal, mapped into the strange mineral substrate found in this very desert, cubitite, then salted with qubits. They were better than the run-of-the-mill pure artificial intelligence. Centuries of trying to get them something to human level had met with very limited success. The next breakthrough, appropriately in Nexus as well, had used a rat brain neural template. The results were literally transformational, and it marked anyone who fused. Not only did Ryan have the ears of a lynx, but the tail as well. He was privately very happy it was a short, stubby thing compared to most felines or canines. Burke started laughing before the fuser process had complete, which impressively provoked the threatened kick in the shins from his superior. Ryan who was already a short, slender man, so the extra curves being fused with Kaylee added a very full-figured lynx woman when the hard light fur flickered on. Burke started laughing again. She was basically nude, except with a steel bikini that covered chest and groin. Like the lynx's normal hard light skin, this one moved like the real thing. Without Kaylee conscious, the sensory integration was imperfect. And his expensive cranial implant struggled to process the rest. This was the price he had to pay. He regarded it as lesser than the alternative. With the RI fully conscious, the fuser nanobots would sink all the way into the bone, changing the inside to match the outer shell. A woman he would truly be for a good long time. The body can't handle that kind of major change frequently, so he'd be stuck that way for a minimum of 3 years. The combat fusers were even faster than the civilian versions and allowed his conventional implant to do its job more effectively. Ryan had already felt the cool air on Kaylee's hard light skin, which felt more like it was actually his own. The artificial lynx's original designation was LNX-LMA-001A. As light mobility armor, she depended on external add-on gear called packs for specialized tasks. And if she adds the expansion pack, she can play Majora's Mask. That's not actually in here, I'm being silly. Unlike Burke's unit that were built in, Ryan put on the nano-lathe gloves and extra hard light shielding for defense. Since the literal breastplate was otherwise empty, they contained 2 extra Saurium batteries and nano-lathe matter. With Wilson holding the cyborg bear's non-existent mouth shut, Ryan stepped backwards into the fixer pack mounted on the skimmer wall. The latches engaged, adding an additional layer of physical armor. It also contained power packs and numerous tools for fixing rides and other mecha in the field. Ryan didn't speak until he was finished hooking up, then spoke in Kaylee's purring voice. Equipment checks out, officers. I'm ready to go. Fucking faux cross-rider, Burke said. Just go active and embrace the boobs. We need every advantage here. My contract doesn't include my manhood, thank you. Ryan snarked. Kaylee's naturally friendly voice made it hard to sound menacing. If you let those shiny metal tits slow you down, Stonegate, I'll hack your ride myself. And the voice came from the man in bare armor, cut off abruptly. turned his glare to his superior officer, whose arms were folded across her chest plate. There seemed to be a private conversation between them, and Burke backed down. Milo's tone was far more friendly. From now on, Mr. Stonegate, any comms from him will be filtered through me. I apologize for his stupidity. I gather you don't fuse often. Only when the job requires it, Officer Wilson. A threat like that would have voided your contract, Ryan said. And thanks. I don't use it often with out-of-tower clients. Kaylee was an old surplus for your agency, and to be honest, not even the auctioneers knew if she was male or female at the time. Regardless, we can't afford to be choosy about what gender ride we buy, and the female ones are generally cheaper. I've had her 4 years, and I'm pretty used to the shiny metal tits now. She shrugged. So you use passive, I understand. I think you look lovely myself. I hope your kitty has a good nap, Wilson said, nodding. Try and keep up. I look lovely, she says. A lovely, pretty kitty, no doubt. Ryan snorted to himself, though for once the compliment seemed sincere. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. The trio went into the aft airlock to prepare for the drop. The skimmer had started to dive for the desert hardpan just before the towers themselves. There were less than 500 meters between the landing zone and crash site. The skimmer's comm laser would report their position as required by treaty. There was a race. Then it was a race to the salvage. I don't have time to be lovely. There's a job to do. Xeris was a super-Earth with 4 times as much surface area than humanity's homeworld. 3 massive supercontinents dominated its surface, named for ones from Earth's past. Laurasia, where the majority of humanity lived, had a pleasant climate with enormous areas suited to human crops. Rodenia, the second largest, had kept all of its native vegetation and wildlife. Last was Gondwana, the last by far straddling the equator. Though it was a large world, the metal-poor crust and core left the surface gravity slightly weaker. The real problem lay in the planetary magnetic field over Gondwana. Even a small solar storm created a spectacular aurora over Gondwana. The continental atmosphere was constantly ionized, making radio a losing proposition. Aurora Borealis. At this time of day, this time of year, located primarily over Gondwana. Can I see it? Right, text baked medium. Most of the time, a laser-linked satellite worked just fine, except in sandstorms. Despite their technology, the dry ocean still swallowed thousands of people on a yearly basis. Never seen again. Ryan Stonegate was middle class by uplift standards. He lived comfortably, and there were always old rise skimmers and other mechs that needed repair and maintenance. Kaylee herself was living proof of the quality of his work, and their partner functioned well despite not being the same sex. He was used to having no active sensors, among the other things the RI did while his or her rider focused on the job. He had various implants to make up for that. There was simply no comparison to a full, conscious RI. If this job works out, I won't be 10,000 moo in the hole anymore, he thought. He didn't like working with Nexus Internal Revenue cops, as these two were, but they did pay well, and Kaylee knew a great deal of their inner workings. The complex relations between the 24 or so city-states on the coastal ring created a bewildering tangle of treaties that apparently never stayed the same on a yearly basis. Uplift was the only city-state on the inner side of the ring, on the edge of the ancient continental shelf. As the dry ocean went, it had the best possible climate. Well, why, it barely hit 50 degrees Celsius in the summer. It was impossible to maintain line of sight in the skimmer to the skimmer in the columns of evaporite deposits. Burke unspooled a filament fiber optic cable from his compact. There was barely any wind, but it was still dusty enough. Inside Kaylee's fuser mode body, Ryan didn't feel the heat at all. Where did this flyer go down where it couldn't be spotted by satellites? Ryan asked. He couldn't change Kaylee's voice. On many occasions, he'd not left user mode and allowed clients to think Kaylee Cross was just one of Ryan's employees, which was essentially the case. People had some strange hang-ups that got in the way of doing business. It didn't precisely crash, Wilson replied. In fact, quite the opposite. The owner of the flyer and the cargo has been imprisoned for tax evasion. We are to assess and, if possible, retrieve some classified military hardware. You're here to make sure our ride in particular is still alive and functional and get it back to your skimmer. Just remember that our contract has a very strict NDA. Please, I'm a professional. This wasn't the first time Ryan had been in the towers, but everything on this planet was supersized except the surface gravity. He'd never seen this section before. Burke, what's our network status? Just fine. Still connected. Everything's normal, Burke replied stiffly. The bear was their go-between. Their messages went to him through the cable, then up to the satellite. Once the salvage was found, they had to report its exact position by law. The trio used their lifters to fly just over the desert floor. Ryan checked the normal salvager's information channel for news, then frowned. 3 launches. One from Nexus? I didn't think you guys license salvagers like that. We don't, Mr. Stonegate, Burke said with a warning glance from Wilson. That's a military suborbital base. We've got some competition. This is hotter than we thought. Must be some military gear in there, Wilson agreed. Must be some military gear in there we weren't told about. Cut the cable, Burke. Double time. They were off faster than Ryan could protest. The physical link to the salvage skimmer gone. Great. Military. That's going to cause a stinking uplift. But I guess they don't care, Ryan thought. The Tri-Ocean was supposed to be off-limits to various militaries except for the Nexus MRS. It was under the jurisdiction of the Gondwanan Federated Marshals, who were the closest thing the supercontinent had to a completely neutral party. Sounds like there's some nasty interagency rivalry, too. The Nexus version of Internal Revenue was as powerful as their regular military. There were a lot of places to hide taxable assets in the dry ocean, and polity? Is that word supposed to be polity? Citizens excelled at finding loopholes on their own. Oh, no, polity. Whatever. In their own bureaucracy. With that one final leap, they lifter-skied down the slope towards the cave entrance at breakneck speeds. All landforms here had been carved by millions of years of wind. There were no hard edges anywhere, and even the numerous caves were completely dry. The trio skimmed the mouth, down a multi-layered slope with alienated layers of red ochre and white gypsum in smooth contours that were dizzying to look at. The massive cargo flyer was just inside, out of view of satellites. Nexus considered itself the forward-looking center of civilization on Gondwana. Hence the portmanteau name they chose for themselves. They were the Next and the Nexus. I never knew that. That polity itself was less than 100 years old. Yet another seed group from the relatively crowded Laurasia, with Rodinia off limits to settlement. Gondwana was the only open, unclaimed frontier on the planet. There were 200 million people and counting off the coastal ring. Even with the uninhabitable dry ocean, there was room for billions more. There was room for billions more. But for such a forward-looking polity, they had some interesting cases of nostalgia. The cargo flyer looked like an ancient six-engined Antonov N-225, the largest aircraft on Earth for many decades. Its 6 engines were turbofans only cosmetically. The information in Ryan's salvage computer identified no fewer than 10 heavy lifters, each worth 50,000 NEU by itself on the open market. Everything looked completely pristine, untouched, but there were no power signatures. Wasting no time, Ryan skimmed up the aft cargo doors and plugged in a power data cable from his right breast. Well, there's a mental image for you. I'd love to get my paws on those lifters. What are you waiting for? Get it open, Bert growled, his ride putting its own urgency into it. Just it, Ryan sputtered, a blast of lifter-propelled dust and rocks pinged against his ride armor, hard enough that he had to manually throw up his hard light shield. The inside of the cave darkened, most of the natural illumination replaced by the fiercely glowing landing lifters on the lifting body suborbital spacecraft now filling the entrance. The craft was easily 3 times the size of Ryan's own skimmer, nearly as large as the cargo flyer they had just found. The nose's shape suggested a wolf's head. Otherwise, the contours of the spacecraft were run-of-the-mill. 2-deck lifting body with stubby wings and a dual vertical tail at the blunt end where the impellers were. He recognized the lupine logo on the nose. It was owned by his much better-equipped competitor. Quixie's pack. She got a sub? Damn. The moment it landed, a grav crane started extending over the top of the spacecraft. Before it could get far, Burke pointed his arm cannon at it and fired, blowing off the tail. That provoked the boarding ramp amp on the side to open. 4 fused, matching lupine rides marched out, followed by a very familiar heavy comm ride, like Burke's, but a female elk. She sought him out. Whoops, my employers aren't going to like that, Kaylee girl. You'll pay for that, Quixie herself growled. Get away from my salvage Nexus. You too, Stonegate. As the Nexus officers and 4 salvagers headed off, Ryan opened a secure laser link to the elk. You can call me Ryan, Rufia. They know. How the hell did you get in with Quixie? I thought you'd had a disagreement a while back. Water under the bridge, old friend. And I was the only comrade left in town when that salvage report rolled in. You wouldn't believe what they're paying me for this. Roland boasted. Nothing personnel, of course. Don't think that it ever could be, but I've got a job to do. We've got a Nexus military suborbital coming in. I'm only interested in what side. You can grab the lifters. Fuckity fuck, Rufia cussed. The two had been friends a long time, having met on Earth years before they ever thought of immigrating. It had been Rufia's idea to leave, and he paid for half of Ryan's own ticket. Rufus had purchased the female elk and enthusiastically become Rufus. At the same time, Ryan bought Kaylee, considering the benefits far greater. Elk were naturally large and good platforms for communications gear and heavy weapons. Rufia had gone self-employed mercenary. Okay, if we both want to get paid, we gotta stop shooting here. Let me do that. You get those doors open. Comprehend? Yes, go, Ryan replied. Burke was about to give Quixie's pack both barrels when Rufia flew between them to mediate. Though the air was still full of contaminating cubitite dust, Ryan opened the doors. Fuck, Burke said. The inside of the cargo was absolutely empty. Stonegate, download logs, anything. Either the cargo's been stolen or it was never here. Find out which. If nothing's here, I still get paid, Ryan thought. He dashed inside the eerily empty hold. The crash had been a few days before. There had been no launches detected, no skimmers in the area. Unless it was a bona fide rescue mission, there were permits to fill out, fees to pay before a salvage operation could start. And even then, it didn't guarantee you'd keep what you found. And Quixie gets her heavy lifters. Damn it, I want a piece of that. The sound of an ominous explosion half a click away froze him as he reached for a PD socket. And then came the deep bass roar of a mil-spec grav lifters closing in. The incoming Nexus suborbital fired a second time. This... Okay. Can you... Fired a second time. This time into the aft end of Quixie's spacecraft. A burst of static told Ryan it wasn't an explosive shot, but an EMP blast powerful enough to scramble its systems. Holy Jesus fuck! Burke sputtered. We're too damned late. Bastards. Let us handle this, Wilson said, ears flat. Disarm or they'll shoot you. There's obviously more to this than meets the eye.